Right, back to part two of our top 10 sci-fi and fantasy books of all time. I think we are on number five now after just hearing my number six. We tried to do this last time, but the storm and the connectivity issues got in the way, Liam. So I think we're on your number five.
I mean, I feel like you're putting too much credence on the storm there. It was our collective will to live.
Yeah, that was a big part of it. We'd already been talking for like two and a half
We're
hours.
like three and a quarter hours into raw recording. But yeah, I will move on to my number five. Just before I do that, just a big shout out to the five people that listened to episode one.
Yep.
I'm sure you're all excited for episode two. Um,
Big love to the fans.
I'm not sure what symbol Tom's making, but I'm
That's
assuming
an F. It's an F, fellas.
Oh, okay.
You realize that's completely irrelevant unless you make noise and the video comes to you. Otherwise, you're just making an F.
Oh,
To just
fellas.
cool.
Change my
Cool.
name as well.
Perfect. So I think as a takeaway from the first episode, what I've tried to do this time is speed things up just a little bit because I think
What?
we dwelled, we did a lot of dwelling last time, so I'm going to try and ramble less and hopefully expedite things just a little bit.
We'll try to ramble less. We'll all fail.
Yeah, I feel like you could probably clip me saying that and you can overdub it to a 30-minute monologue that I do on my number one pick.
Yeah.
Just the explanation of you expediting it is longer than
Yeah.
last time.
We've been here for an hour. So yeah, I'll on that note, I'll go straight into my number five,
Yeah.
which is my folio edition of Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, aka the Strugatsky brothers. Roadside Picnic was written in 1971, and it was written at the height of the Soviet Union. The Strugatskys, I think, were born in maybe Poland, but they spent most of their time in and around like Leningrad, so really in the heart of the Soviet Union. And it's Soviet sci-fi, right? So it's a complete different flavor to anything else that you'll find, particularly vastly contrasted with like American the American optimism of like 50s 60s science fiction. I think there was a bit of a theme in episode one about the word bleak. It came up more than a few times. This definitely ticks that box, which I feel is obligatory for any installment on my list at this point. But Roadside Picnic is all about exploitation. So it's extremely cynical, and it's about the idea that no matter the situation, the way that humans work is the rich get richer, the powerful will abuse the powerless, and exploitation is the the human condition. So Roadside Picnic uses this thought experiment of if you go for a picnic, you'll have your food and you'll discard wrappers or cans, whatever, and when you clear off, what you've done is you've put a load of trash into that environment that to you is just meaningless, but to the insects and the animals that call your picnic spot home, you've just planted these like unknowable artifacts that challenge the realms of possibility. But to you, they're just trash, right? In Roadside Picnic, aliens have stopped by Earth, but they do so without even so much as like acknowledging that we exist. So this monumental moment just passes us by, which is the most Soviet thing ever. We have no idea why they've stopped, but it's theorized they might have needed like fuel or something. But either way, they've left these artifacts behind and created these zones, right, which are filled with these like physics defying artifacts. So there's gravity is affected in very odd ways in these zones. There are extremely hazardous almost like traps. There's like whirlpools, and there's areas that are just almost impossible to navigate, and these zones represent like opportunity for governments to learn about the manipulation of physics, to learn about new methods of propulsion, to learn about new forms of like fuel and stuff. So an extremely dangerous situation that's arisen from something that we can't, by definition, understand, and everyone wants to get in on the action and exploit as much as possible of the value of this like monumental event, to ultimately try and gain power, money, influence. And so the story of Roadside Picnic is all about this guy, Redrick, who's this very much working class guy who becomes what's called a stalker. And they are essentially like a gun for hire, who go into these zones and try and collect artifacts, bring them back, and then sell them to the highest bidder. As you can imagine, it's an extremely dangerous job. It's a job with a very, very high mortality rate. And there are kind of, even if you make it out of the zone, you're still deeply affected and deeply changed by your experience within these zones. There's radiation that means that this guy has got he's got a young daughter who's like horribly mutated. And the overall theme of this book is that it kind of chronicles his life story as these zones start to become more understood and start to become almost controlled by the establishment. At the beginning, it's a bit of a cowboy industry. By the end of it, the government are doing their own thing and trying to take control of these zones. But the overwhelming theme is, no matter what happens, Redrick, this honest and decent guy who wants to look after his family, loves his daughter, loves his wife, he is just caught in this trap of exploitation. And whether he's working for a government who, in theory, should have some degree of care for his welfare, whether he's working for scientists who are trying to pursue, in the pursuit of knowledge, or whether he's working for criminals, he's always exploited. His labor and ultimately his life and that of his family are secondary in terms of secondary concerns to the interests of the powerful who want to exploit him to, as I say, try and get that power, that technology, and ultimately that wealth. So yeah, that's Roadside Picnic. The writing is absolutely astonishing. It's a Russian translation. Obviously, Russian to English it's a difficult language to translate by all accounts. But yeah, the story for me, I read it probably like 4 years ago, and it's still incredibly vivid in my mind. And yeah, for me, this is an absolute must read. And with that Soviet blood running through its veins, there's just nothing like it that I've come across yet. So that's Roadside Picnic.
Cool. It sounds a similar sort of pretext to your 10th one, I think, which was like the fact that there are aliens out there that we pale into significance against, and obviously it's gone a different way since then.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I'm incredibly impressed that you managed to remember that, Alex.
Well, you have had a big impact on me in that small 4-hour phrases you gave.
Or he was watching those this morning to get those numbers up.
Oh yeah.
I wasn't actually, but I just looked at the just in a slight bit where I was listening, but I just looked at the figures for our last one, and the average watch time of the people who've watched today are 20 seconds. So an hour 49, and they averagely watch 20 seconds of it.
Can you put a 20-second version of it where we just all say our number, the book and number?
It's just really quick. Just everyone go through their list, and we might actually get something across.
Does us a bit of a disservice. Neil, I was going to ask you a question. Is it is that book by brothers? Did you say?
Yes. Yeah.
What are they? Do they write more than? I'm just intrigued in people that write books together because I always find it quite an interesting concept. They wrote other things together, and can you tell? Does it feel like there's like two? The only one I've really ever read is Talisman by Peter Straub and Stephen King, and it's quite jarring. Some of it where you can tell there's like two different styles. Is it quite obvious that it's two people, or does it feel like one narrative, or is it just out of interest?
So I think with the thing with the Strugatsky brothers is they pretty much wrote everything together, which I think is quite unique. Like I've read a couple of where like two sci-fi authors have collaborated on a novel, and I do think it's always a bit jarring. But these guys, they almost just have one voice, which I guess considering they're brothers, maybe that's got something to do with it. But yeah.
Have either of you read? Is it James S.A. Corey?
Yeah,
they're two people, aren't they?
It's got like halfway through the first one, but Daniel Abraham, who's half of them, I've read like full 6-book series by him, and I found the James S.A. Corey, what I read, it's so different to his fantasy books, like the style, it was really, yeah, it's just interesting how different it is compared to what he writes when he writes on his own. So it's quite strange.
Yeah, Terry Pratchett wrote with
Neil
someone
Gaiman, did he?
else. Yeah,
Neil
Neil
Gaiman?
Gaiman. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
someone else quite famous now, right? But I've not read any of these either. So
yeah.
I think
It's
it's
like,
probably
quite
know
cool
him at
how
that
we
point.
look at like books, like all other forms of art in some way, you would think of as collaboratively. Like, people make films on their own, but they need a crew and they need a cast and whatever.
yeah,
Like books just always you always think of it as the product of one
one
mind.
person.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's
Just
Cool.
great topic.
a quick question on that. Do you think the main character was an educated person? Did they go to higher education? Because if they did, you could say they went to a Redrick University.
I just, it's that pen that's doing it, me. He's writing down this shite somewhere.
I did make a note of that to bring up later. Right, Tom.
And we're
Thanks,
all
thanks,
glad you
Alex.
did.
Thanks, Alex.
You should put that as that should be the start 20 seconds of the next episode and see if the average watch time comes down in 20
It's down,
seconds.
yeah, it's like 5 seconds.
Yeah, we've gone massively down. Tom, you're number 5, if you please.
Yep. So I reflected a little bit on the 6, and I think whilst most of my books are parts of series, I think it's probably better to kind of summarize the series and then just briefly explain why this is my favorite of the lot. It's so hard when you've read, 3, 4, 5 books to remember the specifics of one. Um, so anyway, so my number 5 is, and this one, I think Alex's might be a bit higher for this book, is Morning Star by Pierce Brown, which is the third
Fuck you.
book in the in the in the Red Rising trilogy. Um, it's interesting actually. So just a couple of things in this trilogy. So when Alex mentioned it, a lot of people mention it. They go, oh, I don't like halfway through the first one, but it was a little bit like YA, so sort of gave up on it. And probably say that it's Brown is basically like the Joe Abercrombie of sci-fi. This is one of the most brutal books I've ever read, and second book's the same. Absolutely grim, brutal, savage, all of that sort of stuff. The series itself, it is it did start with that little YA vibe. So the first book you do have Darrow, who's the main character, and he's sort of repressed, and from what I remember, they don't even know, his people don't even know that there's like a higher society that exists. So they're like way down in the doldrums. And halfway through that book, they realize that there's a better life. Darrow escapes and finds himself in an area where he's basically, one of the better terms, souped up with metal plates and all sorts of stuff. And it's in a world where you can use technology to sort of improve for people. It then becomes a bit of a sort of intergalactic sort of fight, I guess, across the 3 books, with Darrow becoming almost like the leader of his sort of repressed people. So there is a bit of a kind of stereotypical cheesy side to it, but the way Pierce Brown writes is incredible. He really brings to life, the characters. And in Morningstar especially, we just come off the back of Barrow being tortured and kept alive for basically a year, and everybody, all of our characters that we've come across on the board think he's dead. When he kind of comes back into the story, we have sort of a 200-300 page epic battle, but not just so we talked about battles previously, and we talked about how hard it is with like fight scenes and battles in books to kind of stay engaged. What Pierce Brown does, and I think best authors do this, I think Joe Abercrombie does it, is that you have POV for Darrow, and Darrow is in the middle of the big battles and the spaceships and all that. But then we have other more minor characters, and we get to see how they're influencing the world at the same time. So you get to see it from all different angles. You get to see it from both sides, and it really sort of brings to life the devastation of where we find ourselves. Um, Without giving too much away, because I don't know if you'd ever read it, Liam, to be fair, 'cause I'm not sure if it's your sort of sci-fi. But I would say that it probably is just the starting point for me with Pierce Brown. So he has released a subsequent series, which I'm waiting for the last one before I read. But in terms of world building, and character building. From a sci-fi point of view, definitely it's the best book I've ever read in that space. And I'd just say that, it manages to keep the stakes high, and keep you invested without you ever sort of becoming disengaged, because it constantly is at that level. And I think that's a real skill of an author, to kind of have you feeling like the stakes are high, but consistently for hundreds of pages, rather than peaking, to one point and then you start to think, okay, like I don't really care anymore. I just want to get to the end. Um, so yeah, I think it's one of those ones where I really wanted to have this in there. I think it's something I'm going to reread once the new books come out. But if the reason you're not reading it, haven't read it, and it is because you've been heard it might be a little bit like Hunger Games-esque or something like that, couldn't be
Yes.
further away. It isn't. And
It's very YA.
and I would say don't read the first 150 pages of a book and then decide that it's the end of it. I would really encourage anyone to give this one a go. Yeah. So Piers Brown, the Red Rising trilogy, but Morningstar was my favorite.
So Tom, you said that is your, if I'm not mistaken, you said that's the best sci-fi book you've ever read.
So it's my favorite best sci-fi sort of character. What's the word? Like when you think of like the space sci-fi sort of thing. So I have got one
Yeah.
higher. Um,
Okay.
but it goes like got a space opera. I guess what if you say sci-fi to someone that hasn't read sci-fi, I think this is the sort of series they would think about. I don't think they would. I think the vastness of the genre of it is probably not always kind of in people's minds when they first start reading it. They go for think of Star Wars and things like that. So I think it is could be a massive TV series or film. Um, there's no big ideas as such, but it's just big, it's big stakes.
So
There's
I own Red Rising, and I think I bought it on your recommendation, Tom. I just haven't got around to reading it, but it does seem to be very polarizing. And Alex, you clearly have a troubled relationship with this book, so I'd
yeah,
love to know why you find it so jarring when Tom gives it such a glowing review.
yeah, it's a good question. First off, there are some good ideas in it. There's some obvious influences as well, like stuff like Brave New World, 'cause it's a caste system,
Yeah,
and the colors and stuff.
it's color, right? So the reds are at the
Yeah,
bottom, and then the
Yeah,
gold.
gold. They're
Second
all
one's
like gods and stuff like
golden
that.
dawn, isn't it?
yeah. It goes to show you there's only so many ideas floating about, because one of my fantasy stories is based on color systems as well. um, and to be honest, I'm not sure if this is the origin of this idea either. But without going to massive spoilers, there is 20 people watch this. Who it doesn't matter. But you might read it. So
My mum.
I thought you were talking to us then, and it was just nice stuff.
there's kind of a twist early on, isn't there, where Darrow thinks he's doing something for one reason.
Yeah,
Can we tell
yeah.
him that much? Is that a ruiner? They get that out
I,
the way
I,
pretty
I
early.
think I honestly think anything in that first book if you've seen Breaking Bad,
Hmm.
yeah. So remember like the first 6, 7 episodes, it's a bit, they're okay, and then it's brilliant. I think I'd say anything that Alex talks about in the Red Rising book would probably be okay to share, because it'll really peak as you start moving into Golden Sun.
Okay, that's good though, because what I thought was quite good was him and the Reds think they're doing all this backbreaking mining and labor to make Mars habitable, and then he finds out pretty much by accident, if I can remember rightly, that Mars already is inhabited by this ruling class of golds. That is almost lifted directly from a Stargate SG-1 episode. that concept, and I don't even think the Stargate bit was where that idea originally was. There must be some older sci-fi or something that's got that idea. And if you take it back to real history, obviously people subjugating each other. There's a lot of that. But the whole twist thing and him finding out, that was directly in a Stargate SG-1 episode. But it's interesting you say Breaking Bad is your example there, Tom, because I have watched the first 3 episodes and then gave up on it.
Oh
So
my God.
things need to hit me early. And I have a go at the people who only watch this for 20 seconds.
I'm gonna say, yeah. I think
Um,
I think I think
yeah.
the fact that it's so polarizing is almost why it's quite. Yeah, I'll be honest. I read it in a week. I read it. I read a really good honeymoon. Me and Nicole. I read the whole trilogy while I was there. we're in Mexico.
Romantic.
In the day while we're by the sea, and I found reading it in that sort of environment, like back to back, kind of works. Maybe you know what? Maybe if I'd just got the first one and then I haven't got the second, maybe if I'd read the first one and the second or third went out, I don't know. I think I'd have stuck with it definitely, yeah. And again, like for me, it's right up there.
Do you know what put me off, Tom, to get to finally come around to answering Liam's question, because I've laboured at the point a lot. But the real thing that put me off was the kind of weird introduction of body horror about 150 pages in, where you've got this situation where he represents the underclasses. You want a revolution, fine, I'm with that, good ideas. And they go, you know how we're going to do it? You're going to sort of weld wings onto your back. And I just went, no, I'm out. I can't just. I was
I think
just like, why?
but what that sort of does is as you get further, it sort of shows you how in this world how far. And again, it's not a new idea. I know it's in it's in like YA stuff. I can think about it in things like Hunger Games and stuff, but it's to show you how far the elite have gone with this concept of kind of being able to like improve themselves. And the only way for Dara to even begin to even consider infiltrating the society is to become almost like a disgraceful million times over the top version of like what we consider someone strong and powerful to be. Wings. He becomes like 9 feet tall. I'm really and again,
I just thought that was dumb.
it's it's um it's again, I think it's hard to do any sort of book justice by talking through it without someone reading it. But I personally think, Liam, that it'd be worth a go. It's just my opinion. If you were into it, and again, from what the sort of sci-fi you read, it'd probably feel quite light in some spaces. But maybe if you were just feeling like you wanted something a little bit easygoing, but it has that sort of what I've seen to like you seem to like a really grim, horrific parts for every book you read. So there's I can across all three books. There's like I think the body count in this book in the end turns out to be something like 550,000 people or something stupid like that. So it's there, and there's a lot of like main. It's got that like George R. R. Martin sort of vibe where anyone can go at any time. Um, yeah, I mean, and it's
Also,
POV, so there's lots of different points of view, which I quite keeps you engaged in these sort of bigger series. I think they're not big either, about 400 pages each. So
if you're thinking, you know what I want? I really want a will they, won't they teenage sexy love story with a sexy triangle of people, and you go, yeah, I want to read some of that. Get involved, because there's a lot of that.
Sexy triangle.
There's not a sexy. There's not a sexy
triangle.
There's a bit of love in there, but I mean, what's love got to do with it?
Good question.
I didn't think we'd have a Tina Turner quote this early in the in the video, but here we are. It's also interesting that you chose the third book in the series, Tom. I think we discussed last week the slow decline of most series, like the disappointment that comes with not having a satisfying conclusion to a trilogy. I find that such a off-putting. The last trilogy I read, the third book was so disappointing that it just put me off reading trilogies in general because of the time investment to get to a dissatisfying conclusion. There's a bugbear.
I think with someone like Chris Brown, one thing that he does do is he's quite open that he writes the whole series before releasing the first book. So that's what he did with this, and I think you can tell. And I think some of the series the series now I've seen where they release it as a standalone and then they release a sequel off the back of it, which they clearly never planned to do. So yeah, this one it sticks the landing and then some. It's definitely not always the case though.
Sticks the landing, but Alex will never know.
Yeah, I will never.
And he also,
know.
and he won't watch Breaking Bad either. Jesus Christ.
No.
I'm trying to figure out. Like Breaking Bad must be what? There was how many seasons? 7?
It's like 5 or 6, but they were hugely long, was it? Long, but not
trying to figure out if Alex watching 3 episodes of Breaking Bad, which is like 3 hours out of probably like 80 hours of TV, is actually better than somebody watching 20 seconds of an hour and 40-minute podcast.
Not much difference.
Can't figure out who's getting the greater experience or not.
It's definitely the watchers of our podcast. Little do they realize. My number 5 is a book by Patrick Rothfuss called I was going to say Killing in the Name of. It's definitely not called that. It's called Name of the Wind. I've just gone with the first one
of
a series that I think supposed to be 3 or 4, and there's 2, and we'll never see the end of it. Much like a lot of the books and the authors on this list. Yeah, it's just a massive, depressing bone to pick with a lot of fantasy authors. And they start these great series, like pretty much ubiquitously, most people in fantasy readings' favorite authors, and then just don't show any signs of wanting to finish. It's just a bit annoying.
It's an incredible book, though. It's a brilliant character study, isn't it? Like
Yeah, and
one person.
it's really fun. It's like 700 pages long, but in my opinion, fills that quite well. It could probably be a little bit smaller, but for most, yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff that happens. In short, it's a guy called Coates who owns a pub, and it turns out basically this guy comes into this pub called the Chronicler, and he's like a historian and likes writing down people's stories. So he does. Coates tells him all about his life, and it turns out
Who's that?
Coates the name he tells the Chronicler when he's in the
yeah,
pub.
yeah.
He goes, actually, I am a guy called Kvothe, which is Kvothe. If I was called Kvothe, I probably wouldn't go for an alias that sounded so similar to my name.
Yeah, I'll be Coat on a Saturday.
Coat, yeah, it's like what? That you mishear that it's the same name. And this guy who's like a ginger guy that's important in the story for some reason, who's like the world's greatest wizard. But he started a war by killing the king, I think. That kind of is hinted at, but he starts at the beginning as being a child and he's being a traveling musician, basically a gypsy, and these bad wizards kill his entire family. And then you get the wizard learning at school trope again, which is just as good in this one.
It's been too long. I
don't think anyone I've ever read has done it any better though. I nearly put this in my top 10. I think he's probably the best one I've read around. It is tropey, but it is. I don't know. I thought it was brilliant the way he does it. It's not even didn't even do anything. It's just how he writes. It's just like unbelievably.
It's very entertaining. Quoth's he's likable and unlikable. He's kind of likable but problematic. He does some things that are he's morally ambiguous. Yeah, that's probably the nicest way of putting it. And he falls in love with a prostitute, and there's quite a lot of mileage in that. But yeah, it's just him at school being a lad. He has someone he doesn't like. You could make just sort of 3 or 4 books, films on just him being at school if it wasn't so close to Harry Potter and stuff that's already been done. But this book does it really well. He's a bit of almost sort of Dennis the Menace, but slightly more notorious sort of guy. And then the next one, does he grow up a bit, or is it still him at school?
Wise Man's Fear. Yeah. He grows up. Yeah, God, I read these when I was at uni, so fucking hell. But yeah, I just remember him being coming to the Queen, and he definitely grows up. And I think from my recollection, the way the second one ends is we're almost going to understand. We're hoping to get to the point where the timeline sort of nearly meshed, but
yeah, because obviously you're starting with him in the present, and then it all goes back, and then he kind of gets there. And I think there's a thing where he goes off and seduces like the Queen of the Underworld for a bit.
Yeah,
it's like okay, cool. It's a bit like Tom Bombadil bit actually. It's a bit odd.
It's so. If you're looking at something purely, I think fantasy's where it's looking at someone that's purely just. I think he could have written 2,000 pages about a guy that lives in a non-fantasy world that just goes to the shops and works at Asda. And I literally think you'd read it just because there's that level of writing and prose and like it says fun's a really good word for it. It is fun, isn't it? I can't explain it.
Yeah, there's whole sections like chapters where it's just him on a night out with his mates, and he's also like a virtuoso musician, and just him sort of being a kind of one of those people that are really good at everything, annoyingly confident and arrogant, but also quite funny and sort of gets away with it.
Say it's like a slice of life fantasy. It's almost like a fantasy version of like a Pulp Fiction scene sometimes, where like there's doesn't really always link into the wider story, but you're all in because you really engage with the characters and how it's approached. So yeah, but like Alex says, it's The Doors of Stone should have came out in 2010, and it's 2024, and we haven't seen it yet. Wow. So there we go.
I didn't realize it was that far behind.
Something like that, yeah. It's something crazy like that, yeah.
Is the author doing a George R. R. Martin and just can't be asked?
think so. Yeah, you've got George R. R. Martin, this guy, and Scott Lynch, who we'll talk about later, who are all the main culprits. The culprits is pretty harsh. I mean, they can do what they want. They're the authors, but they're not finishing series that really lots of fans like.
I think the sad thing is for me, for example, I think this book and Scott Lynch and Martin would have been like top 5. I think the fact it's been so long, it's really hard to separate it. The Name of the Wind actually came in 2007.
Wow.
And then The Wise Man's Fear was 2011. The Doors of Stone has been ending for. It's not like he's done anything since. He's not even doing.
No, I was just going to say they've got different reasons. George R. R. Martin does a lot of different stuff, and I think he's just so interested in all the other stuff that he's kind of like, and I also want to make it good when it comes out. So he's kind of like almost stopped by his own. Yeah, that's Patrick Rothfuss. Almost stopped by his own sort of like distracting himself. Scott Lynch, I think, has sort of mental health difficulties, which is not helping, obviously. So that's kind of fair enough. And I think Patrick Rothfuss just like I'm loaded. So why?
Richard Rothfuss did he got in trouble recently. He did like a Kickstarter. He had put a Kickstarter together for a charity, and he said if it was something like 100,000, he'd release 2 chapters from Doors of Stone. To be the Kickstarter hit 100,000 in like it's like an hour, because his book's massively. I'm like, if you look at his sort of millions and millions of copies, and so he made the 100,000, and he's never released the 2 chapters. And he's got in like serious trouble for it. And he keeps saying he's going to release them, but he's never released them. And like the money's gone to charity, so I guess it's good for charity, but it's under like false pretenses. He's a bit of a weird dude.
Prick.
Yeah, probably
genius prick.
Yeah, he's a bit like Thoth. If he's like Thoth, then yeah, he's probably a genius prick. I'm kind of conscious that I think the 10 minutes signs come up.
Can I just check then? So we've had the whole 40 minutes and we've just done one each, yeah?
Yes,
indeed.
Well, I feel like that was we're getting there.
160 minutes to go. Oh, God.
Are we gonna leave and rejoin then?
Yeah, I think we might have to, otherwise it'll just cut out. I mean, I don't actually know what happened, but
it just ends.
Your laptop explodes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right, I'll send out another request. I'll see you in a minute.
Bye.